sisi tukufe njaa. Maisha Kenya imekuwa ngumu sababu hakuna kitu yoyote sahihi unaweza fanya usaidika kama mwananchi wa kawaida. Ukiangalia kama sahihi mvua hakuna, hatuna matarajio, tunatarajia hata kupata mimea kama mahindi kama vyakula vingine za kawaida ya wananchi.
Gharama ya uchumi imepanda sana. Sasa tunauzia mkate nakaa kwa duka tunauza 70 bob na ilikuwa inauzwa 50 bob. Sasa imepanda sana. Sasa inabidi ikae hapa inaharibika.
Imefika kipindi ambao hata kuleta mizigo imekuwa shida, maana uzalishaji kwa mashamba imekuwa shida. Mafuta imepanda na hata usafirishaji pia imekuwa pia ni shida. Kwa hivyo vitu zimepanda bei kiwango ya kwamba hata wanunuzi wakikuja kununua hawezi wakamudu kuweza kununua kwa bei ambayo inafaa, na wasiponunua hizo bidhaa ambazo tuko nazo zinaharibika kwa sababu zinaharibika kwa haraka.
Levi hiyo kidogo inafaa watu wajadiliane, sababu ukijaribu kuangalia saa hizi mtu kama mimi nikiwa hapa hakuna vile utaniambia nikuje nione nyumba Nairobi, na vyumba vya Nairobi haitatocha sisi wote wa Kenya. We are about 41 million ama 42 million Kenyans, na sisi wote hatutaishi Nairobi.
Hata hii kitu inaitwa housing inatuletea shida sisi. Juu kama wasichana hawezi jenga. Hiyo ni kitu ambayo tuwezi jenga nyumba.
Hii manyumba hii imefika wapi? Itasaidia watu ambaye 200,000 plus what households. How many counties are there? 200,000. Sasa itasaidia maskini wako hapa.
Na mtazamaji, ni hisia mseto kuhusiana na ada ya nyumba na pia vile gharama ya maisha. Hebu tusikie wakazi wa Nyeri wana yapi ya kusema kuhusiana na mswada huu wa fedha.
Hapa katika kaunti ya Nyeri tunaangalia jinsi mswada huu wa fedha utakavyoathiri biashara na haswa gharama ya kufanya biashara. Tumeweza kuzungumza na baadhi ya wanabiashara ikiwemo wale katika sekta ya uchukuzi, na haya hapa ndio maoni yao.
Ni kama kwa mfano saa hii ile faida tunapata kwa mshanga na ngali kwenda kubeba mshanga kama tani 14, faida yake inakuwa kama 4,000. Sasa mafuta ikiongezwa na ile bei tu, kwa sababu tukianza kuambia yale watu na usia hata wao tutawaongezea bei, ni kama hawezi wakanunua.
Hii bill kama stima itaongezwa tutaadhirika kwa hii kazi ambayo tunafanyanga. Wakati uliopita tumezoea kulipa 10k, sasa imekuja ikapanda, tumelipa hii 10k. Sasa tena ikiongezewa tunaona kama tutalipa 20 something.
To affect job wise. Ukiangalia like now products are very expensive.
Wanabiashara hawa pia wametoa mapendekezo yao kuhusu mswada huu wa fedha.
Serikali igoje na itulie, na mambo ikiwa mazuri hata watu kuwaongeza kitu haitakuwa shida.
Serikali iangalie sana hapo, ishukishe bei ya stima, isiongezee bei ya stima, kwa itaadhirika kwa sisi wananchi wa chini.
Na hayo ni maoni ya baadhi ya wanabiashara katika kaunti hii ya Nyeri. Mimi ni Martin Monene.
All right, Martin, thanks so much for that. From Nyeri County all the way to county number 001, Mombasa County, we find our very own Francis Mtalaki.
Gharama ya maisha imeendelea kuwa mzigo mkubwa miongoni mwa Wakenya. Katika pitapita zetu Malindi mjini kaunti ya Kilifi, tunakutana na Kenza Ondiek, mfanya biashara na mchumia juani katika duka hili. Anasema kibaba anachopata kamwe hakiwezi kukidhi mahitaji yake na familia kutokana na kupanda kwa gharama ya maisha.
Vitu havinunuliki my friend. Vyakula vinunuliki. Saa hii ukiingia hata na shilingi 3,000 kwa duka yani pesa haitoshi. Pesa haitoshi. Na kama tutaendelea namna hii, basi Kenya itakuwa na magaidi wengi sana. Manake ukijaribu kuangalia Wakenya wa kawaida, wale watu maskini hawawezi kupeleka watoto shule. Na kama hatutapeleka watoto shule, ili taifa litakuwa linaelekea ulimwengu gani? Manake watu wameshindwa hata kupeleka watoto shule. Sumbuka miji uone vile watoto wako nje.
Anasema hapo mbeleni walala hoi ndio walikuwa wamebanwa sana, ila kila bidhaa imepanda, faida ya biashara imekuwa finyu na sasa wanaojituma juani kila siku wamebanwa kiasi cha kukosa kumudu gharama ya maisha.
Muna expect nini? Kuweni na huruma na Wakenya. Wakenya wanaumia. Kuna Mkenya hata kupata shilingi 100 kwa siku ni ngumu. Kuna Mkenya hata kupata maji ya kunywa yenyewe akunywa ni shida.
Mita chache kutoka kwake tunampata mzee Famau Mohamed. Katika maisha yake amekuwa akijipatia mkate wake wa siku kupitia sekta ya jua kali, ila anasema mwaka huu mambo yamekuwa magumu. Kila bidhaa anayonunua au umeme anaotumia umemlazimu yeye kuongeza bei kwa wateja wake ili apate faida na senti za kujikimu.
Kila kitu kimekuwa ghali. Imekuwa 1000 hapa kwetu Kenya si pesa. Imekuwa ni kama shilingi 100 ile ya zamani. Na hili ni jambo ambalo limetuumiza sana na linaendelea kutuumiza.
Hili limepunguza idadi ya wateja, na vijana hao wanaojituma wana matumaini kuwa leo mambo yatabadilika, ila kila kukicha matumaini yanazidi kuwa finyu, kwani gharama ya vitu muhimu imepanda maradufu.
Matumizi ambayo ya kila siku, mfano chakula, sukari, mafuta, mchele, hivi sasa inakuwa hainunuliki tena. Imekuwa kila kitu imekuwa ghali.
Sasa wanachokitaka ni kwa serikali ya Kenya Kwanza kuweka breki ushuru katika bidhaa muhimu ili kupunguza mzigo wa gharama ya maisha, hasa vyakula na mafuta wanayotumia kila siku. Francis Mtalaki, Ringa Citizen, Malindi, kaunti ya Kilifi.
Naam, ni mtazamo kama huu, maoni kama haya, hisia kama hizi ndizo mtazamaji zilizopelekea shirika la Royal Media Services kuandaa kikao kama hiki tukakiita the big conversation.
Absolutely, and like Lulu said, we've transformed all our studios from Citizen TV to Inoro TV to Ramogi TV into 4 studios. We've got the Wananchi studio, which is where we are here. We've got the Town Hall studio. We've got the government studio, and where we're going to right now, the expert studio, where you find our very own Sam Gitugu. Sam, take it away.
All right, thank you so much, Jeff and Lulu. And of course, now that time that we want to focus on the cost of living and what the finance bill is doing to the cost of living. At the moment, we want to begin by looking at the value-added tax, call it VAT. At the moment, it is charged at 8% on fuel, but it is being proposed that it rises to 16%. Of course, this has been going on for a couple of years now at 8%. Previously, it was 0 rated. There is also a proposal, taxation at the moment in Nairobi. The VAT currently is 8%, and based on the figures that were released by IPRA in May, that VAT was 13 shillings 53 cents. Now it is being proposed that the VAT should double to 16%. Of course, there's several levies that are also part of the cost of fuel that are being proposed that actually they should be reduced. But just a quick look at what has happened to the price of fuel for the past, say, 10 months or so, since President William Ruto became. August 2022, the price of a litre of petrol was 159 shillings 12 cents. At the moment, it's 182 shillings 70 cents. There's a difference of 23 shillings 58 cents. But there's something you need to note that at that time, in August 2022, there was a subsidy of up to 70 shillings a litre of petrol. But for diesel, at the time he became president, it was at 140 shillings per litre. At the moment, it's 168 shillings 40 cents, the difference of 28 shillings 40 cents, but again there was a subsidy that was applying at the moment. For a litre of kerosene, at that time in August 2022, 127 shillings 94 cents. This has grown to 161 shillings 13 cents, of course, after the removal of the subsidy, and the difference now, we are talking about 33 shillings 19 cents. These are just some of the issues that are contained in the finance bill, including on the VAT exemptions. Aircraft spare parts are being proposed that they should be exempted so as to bring repair works back to Wilson Airport. There are the raw materials on fertilizer that are being proposed that they should be exempted from VAT, that is the value-added tax for the inputs, but also there is a proposal to charge insurance claims 16% VAT once you have been compensated. Of course, currently it is non-vatable. That's just a brief of what is happening. Over to you, Ayub and Lincoln, with the government studio.
Na bila shaka asante sana Samge tuko kwa maelezo hayo. Tuingia katika swala letu la pili ambalo ni gharama ya maisha, na bila shaka ni swala ambalo ni nyeti sana, kwa ni wengi wa Kenya kama tulivyosikia wakizungumza katika taarifa ambazo zimekusanywa hapo awali. Tumesikia wengi wakisema kwamba pesa hakuna, pesa hamna kwenye mifuko yetu, na ni swala ambalo tungependa tulizungumzie kwa kina zaidi katika mjadala huu mkuu, tukiwa nao wageni katika studio ambao wanawakilisha upande wa serikali. Na nakuja kwako Mheshimiwa Ochieng, David Ochieng, ambaye ni mbunge wa kule Ugenya. Umewasikia wa Kenya, bila shaka umewasikia wa Kenya kutoka maeneo ya Samburu, umewasikia wa Kenya kutoka sehemu nyingine wakiteta gharama ya juu ya maisha. Swala hili la mafuta, kupanda kwa ushuru wa mafuta kutoka 8% hadi 16%, bila shaka kutakuwa na athari zake katika karibu sekta zote za uchumi. Hii serikali bado ni ile inamjali mwananchi wa pale chini kwanza. Ukiangalia kwa mfano kama ulivyosema Samuel Gituko, bei ya mafuta ya taa anayotumia mwananchi wa kawaida imepanda kwa shilingi 33 kwa kila lita. Bwana Ochieng.
Asante sana Bwana Lincoln. Leaders are elected not to do the easy things. Leaders are elected to do the difficult things. And you've heard Kenyans speak. And what I can tell you is that for the last 8 months, what I'm happy about is that we found a subsidy, fuel subsidy, that was bleeding us every month. In the budget committee now we're having a bill of 48 billion shillings. We paid by the taxpayers, same as we're complaining about life having gone up. And this had to be stabilized. And that's why the subsidy was removed. And the effect of it was that the price had to go up. And then, of course, you have the dollar issue. The reason that the fuel price has to go up is to ensure that we're having a similar, same tax regime applied across the board to ensure that, you may not know this, but when you're doing 8% for fuel, you're also subsidizing some of the richest people in the country who can afford fuel without a subsidy. Because it's basically a subsidy when you're doing 8%. And we want to subsidize production. And so I believe that we're going to have to take the very difficult decisions that are required for this country to move forward. And some of the proposals that have been made in the finance bill for me are important to ensure that we're able to raise revenue that matches what we want to do as a country to grow. And so if you go back to the issue of even the housing levy that I think has been hit so hard, you want to create jobs. And how do you create jobs? If today there's a big housing boom in the country, but we are importing precast walls, so we're importing sand, we're importing cement, we're importing all the building materials in the country today. That's why we're not making money. The houses are being built, so many of them, but it's not creating jobs. And so we want to have our own standards in the country. We want to ensure that the consumption materials in the country are being sourced locally to create jobs. And I believe that we need to have a long-term view of this, not an emotional short-term view that people are hurting. If you're hurting and someone is giving you Panadol to cure your pain today, and the pain is going to last for 3-4 years, then someone giving you a shot today and the pain goes, you need to choose. And I believe that you need to do the heavy lifting at this time so that you can live better lives in the future.
Okay. Honorable Kimani Kuria, you chair the Finance and National Planning Committee of the National Assembly. And the clerk notified that more than 1,000 memoranda were filed with you, more than hundreds of stakeholders appeared before your committee. To just be specific with the numbers, how many were for and how many were against it? And to what degree will you consider some of the recommendations that were put forward by the stakeholders?
Thank you very much, Ayub. One of the things I celebrate about the beauty of our Constitution, and particularly Article 118 of our Constitution, that talks about that for Parliament to make any piece of legislation, there's need for public participation. And that's why I'm very excited that this evening the whole country is talking about the finance bill. I was with my grandmother over the weekend and she was asking me, why did I invent this finance bill? And I was telling her, this finance bill has been there every year since the proclamation of our Constitution. So I think one thing we must appreciate as Kenyans, the committee that I chair of Committee of Finance and National Planning and the Kenya Kwanza administration has made it clear that we are going to carry out our legislative work. We're going to carry out our functions as per mandated by the Constitution in an open manner. This conversation we're having this evening, I'm looking at it's like you're telling it's like the constitutional amendment we had in 2010. It's perhaps like the multi-party debate that we had in 1992. So we are having in our country discussing matters based on issues, and you have everybody. You know, I was watching those people at Jivanji, even commenting about housing levy and others. Even if they don't understand, now we are beginning to have a conversation based on issues on this country, and you're beginning to listen to you. To your question that you asked, sometimes I feel sad that this housing bill has become, this finance bill has become a housing bill, because every conversation has been about the house levy. But that's just one clause. The finance bill has 157 pages of different amendments across all sectors of our economy. But which is also good, we are concentrating really much on the housing levy and forgetting or not discussing the many other provisions that you've done on this particular bill. To answer your question directly, we received emails of over 1,600 different memoranda from different parts of the country. We had physical meetings with 188 stakeholders. We had a town hall meeting of around 110 people drawn from across the country. But then people are saying that we are opposing the bill. Then how do you oppose, Ayub, a clause that, for example, provides amnesty for all for all fines that are imposed on people that perhaps that incorporated a company a few years ago? They did not remember that they incorporated this particular company. Some of us registered company were in school, and we're providing amnesty for them. We are reducing railway development fee, import declaration levy. We are reducing rental income tax from 10% to 7.5%. How do you oppose that? So the conversation, unfortunately, has shifted from the issues that are contained in the bill to the entirety of the bill. So I cannot tell you how many people opposed or proposed the bill. Why? Because even in part of the lawmaking process, this evening the Committee of Finance and National Planning is going to retreat to do a report to evaluate what are all these issues that were raised. I am going to table that report next week on Tuesday. Then hopefully on Wednesday we have the second reading, and after that we have what we call a committee of the whole house. The voting on the bill will be clause by clause. It is not an overwhelming of those that support finance bill say aye, of those that support. It doesn't work like that, and that's why I feel we are not doing. Kenyans are misinformed in that particular sector. And I'm telling you, the Article 118 that gives power to public participation, we cannot purport to have spent public money. We have Kenyans spend all their time to come give us their views, which some are very good views. They're telling us, if you pass this proposal as it is, you're not going to collect because you need to provide a rate, for example, on repatriation income. If you pass this like this, it's going to be ambiguous. Tighten it like this, and you're going to collect more. So we're actually listening to Kenyans. And I'm really liking this discussion even today, because this is further public participation that inform our decision making.
Tunatumai kwamba hakikisho lako kwa Wakenya kwamba mtaweza kuangalia maswali haya yote kwa undani litatekelezwa, kwa sababu hapo awali kama nilivyosema kuna baadhi ya viongozi ambao wana vyeo vya juu sana ambao wamekuwa kizungumza na kusema kwamba itapitishwa jinsi ilivyo, kwamba hakuna koma itabadilishwa. Lakini kwanza tufike kwake Moses Kuria ambaye ni waziri anayeshughulikia masuala ya viwanda, biashara na uwekezaji. Mheshimiwa Moses Kuria, kwa kuangalia tu pendekezo hili la kipekee kuhusiana na mafuta, 8% ndio ushuru ambao unatozwa sasa hivi mafuta, tukihamia 16%, unahakikisha gani kwamba kwa kweli gharama ya maisha itashuka na sio kupanda, ikitiliwa maanani mheshimiwa kwamba karibu kila sekta hapa nchini Kenya yategemea bei ya mafuta, na tumeona athari zake wakati bei hii imekuwa ikipanda. Usafirishaji wa bidhaa kutoka kiwanda hadi kule mashinani, usafirishaji wa malighafi wategemea mafuta. Unahakikisha gani kwamba licha ya kupandishwa kwa gharama hii ya mafuta, ushuru wa mafuta hadi 16%, gharama ya maisha bado itasalia chini?
Kwanza wacha nishukuru shirika la Royal Media kwa kuandaa huu mjadala. Nimefurahi sana, na hii ndio demokrasia tunataka, kusikiza kila mtu bila kung'oa reli na bila kuandamana. Tunasikiza upande huu na upande ule mwingine. Kama tungekuwa tunafanya mambo kwa ustaarabu kama hivi, tungekuwa mbali sana kama nchi. Kwa hivyo mimi nimefurahia kwamba nimeweza kupata nafasi ya kupata hisia za Wakenya kutoka upande mbalimbali. Mwishowe ni wabunge wetu 348 ambao wako huko bunge, na mimi natumai ya kwamba kila mtu ataheshimu, kwa sababu wao wabunge wamechaguliwa na raia, ile wataamua kwa bunge, kila mtu aheshimu. Tumesema ya kwamba kila mtu atapata nafasi yake ya kuongea, but at the end of the day majority will get their way. Ya pili, tumemaliza mwaka mmoja sasa tangu tuchaguane, tuko mwezi wa 6, karibu tuingie mwezi wa 8, mwaka mmoja ishe. Sisi kama Kenya Kwanza tuko na ile manifesto tulipelekea wananchi. So kwa hivyo mimi nataka kusema watu wasione kama kwamba tuliamka siku moja tukasema tuko na hii ama tuko na ile ama tuko na housing. Hii yote tulileta tukauzia na Wakenya wakaunga mkono hiyo sera, na lazima tutimize ile ambao Wakenya walipitisha. Nikuja kwa swali yako, mambo ya kumanage mambo ya uchumi ni mambo ya unaangalia upande huu na upande ule mwingine. Kuna ile taxes ambayo imepunguzwa. Tumesema upande wa gesi tumepunguza. Tumesema mambo ya rental income tumepunguza. Lakini acha nikwambie, kila mtu anajua ya kwamba Uhuru Kenyatta alituachia madeni. Na madeni ya Uhuru hatuwezi kuepuka. Lazima tukalipa. Usifikirie tu hakutakuwa na gharama. Wakati tunalalamikia madeni, hiyo ya Uhuru Kenyatta iko na gharama yake. Na gharama moja, wakati unaingia kwa gari, ukipata nauli imeongezeka, ujue ya kwamba, kumbuka ya kwamba madeni ya Uhuru lazima tulipe. Lakini pia wakati tuliingia kwa serikali, ili jambo la subsidy kwanza, niongee mambo ya subsidy. Tukasema subsidies distort markets and subsidies distort the economy. Juzi nilisikia rais wa mpya wa Nigeria, Tinubu, siku ya kuapishwa kwake, kama tarehe 13 mwezi wa 9, wakati rais yule Ruto aliapishwa, hata Tinubu wa Nigeria kitu kwanza alitangaza ya kwamba subsidy ya mafuta ameondoa kwa sababu haiwezi kuendelea kwa muda mrefu. Yaani kwa kimombo tunasema sio sustainable. Kwa hivyo mimi nataka kusema hivi. Mimi najua gharama ya maisha upande mwingine kwa sababu ya mafuta inaenda juu. Ndidi Nyoro amewaambia kwamba tutatengeneza barabara, tutatengeneza hospitali, tutatengeneza kilimo. Hii mambo yote trilioni 3 na kitu ambao nataka tutumie za kuendelea katika hizo maendeleo ni bilioni 700 peke yake. Kuna wafanyikazi wengi 100 milioni 1 wako kwa serikali ambao wanatumia kiwango kikubwa sana. Useme sasa wacha tupunguze idadi ya watu ambao wanafanya kwa serikali, unasikia nduru tena kutoka kwa Wakenya wale. Kwa hiyo mimi nataka kusema hivi, tupatieni nafasi tufanye yetu. Baada ya miaka 4 tuko na appointment na mpiga kura. Okay. Mpiga kura ataangalia kama tumefanya mambo ambayo tulisema tutafanya ama hatujafanya. Na pia niongeze kusema hivi, niseme ya kwamba lazima tutubainishe kati ya kuongezeka kwa gharama, ni maisha imeenda juu ama ni mwananchi hana pesa kwa mfuko. Mimi nasema kusema kwa sababu hata huko Europe na America inflation iko juu sana. Dola wakati tulichukua hii serikali ilikuwa 110. Sasa hii iko 140. Hata hiyo msemo mafuta imepanda, sio kitu kulinganisha na vile dola imeendelea kupata nguvu. Sio hapa nchi zote, mimi ni mtu wa kutembea dunia mzima. Mimi nakwambia hii maana dunia mzima. Kwa hivyo tuseme hata kama bei ya gharama ya maisha itaenda juu kidogo, hizi juhudi ambao tunasema ya kujenga nyumba, ya kujenga viwanda, ya kutengeneza ajira, mwananchi atakuwa na pesa zaidi kwa mfuko. Kwa hivyo hata hiyo gharama haitakuwa kubwa sana.
Thank you, CS. Your time is appreciated. Coming to you, Chairperson of the Budget Committee of the National Assembly, Ndindi Nyoro. When we talk about the VAT increment on fuel, this will have a 31% impact on the cost of electricity because we use diesel in the generation of electricity in the country. And it then means that we'll be charging 7 shillings on the fuel cost charge per unit, that is FCC. I mean, when you have an increment on VAT by 8%, which definitely will be pushed to the consumer, then this upscales the cost of electricity in the country. Yet you say you want to manufacture more, that's why you have taxed some of the products that come into the country. Isn't this double standards?
Thank you very much, Ayub. If you allow me, I can answer in a holistic manner the issue of the cost of living, and especially in a comparative sense. In a comparative sense by using inflation, because basically, and I'll go technical first, then I'll go to what we are doing across the entire bird of the cost of living. First of all, when we talk about inflation in Kenya, let me start with the technical side. We talk about, number one, food inflation, number two, what we call fuel inflation, and number three, what we call core inflation. The reason I've tabulated those is to also tabulate also what are we doing on each. The cost of living is high, and I agree. And the first step towards solving a problem is to accept that there is a problem. The point of the matter is that it would be an ideal situation if, and especially the commodities that we use on the day-to-day as Kenyans, are at a much lower price. That is the ideal situation. But now, we are where we are. How are we there? Number one is that globally, there has been global inflation, and especially stemmed by the fact that we have seen, you know, it is usually said, when the US coughs, all the other economies catch cold, and especially emerging economies like ours. We have seen Fed increase the Fed rate 10 times in a row, 10 consecutive times, to a point where now the Federal Reserve rate is now at 5.2%. But we are not in America, we are in Kenya. Kenya plugs into the global economy. That is a fact. Most of our fuel, not most, all our fuel products are imported. And therefore, when there is a variation in terms of the currency at which we pay it, then that cost also spirals now to what we pay at pump. That is on the fuel. And that is the factor of the reason why fuel is high. Let me talk about subsidy before I go to food inflation. You know, majority of the people, and especially in the opposition, they keep citing the price of fuel then and the price of fuel now. And of course, as you tabulated very well, it is about the subsidy. 70 shillings in this product, the other product, that other amount of subsidy. What Kenyans must know is that the subsidy that was there was subsidy in terms of lip service. It is now us who are paying for this subsidy. In this current budget that we are making, the one that we submitted today, we are actually paying 25 billion. But let me go to food inflation, because I don't want to take all the time on one segment. In terms of food inflation, food inflation and fuel inflation, you never solve them using monetary tools. You solve them using physical policies. And the physical policy we are taking in terms of the cost of living and the segment of food inflation is that, yes, there has been supply chain cuts, and especially globally after the Russia-Ukraine war. Russia and Ukraine, by the way, were the number one importers of wheat combined, number one importers across the world. Now to them it is the exports of edible oils. That is a supply chain cut. Okay. Now what are we doing currently? In this budget, we are putting in money for fertilizer. Why? We have to be inward looking in terms of food, the value chain of food. We are, if you check even in the finance bill, we have talked about manufacture of fertilizer inside, and we have exempted all the raw materials used in that regard, as we have done also in terms of the inputs of people who will be manufacturing inputs within agriculture. So there is something we are doing in the budget, tangible, allocation of money in terms of value chains, in terms of production of food, and also I have said about fuel.
Did you say that the Russia-Ukraine war has had effect on the global food supply chain?
It has had a big effect in the global food supply chain.
Including in Kenya?
And also in terms of prices.
Even in Kenya?
We cannot keep on ranting.
Okay. Including even in Kenya?
Including in Kenya. Okay. Across the world. Okay. Across the globe.
And one final question.
Yes, sir.
When you admittedly say that, and the Kenyan people are listening to you, isn't it then an irony that that is not the position that your campaign team held in the months leading up to the elections in August? In fact, the president who was then the presidential candidate of the UDA said that the current government then should not blame the economic crisis in Kenya on the Russia-Ukraine war. Yet his budget committee chairperson and a UDA MP sits here today, says that Russia and Ukraine war has had impact on the Kenyan economy. Why the double standards? I mean, this is mixed communication.
What I have stated is a statement of fact. What you should distinguish is between what were they doing then and what are we doing now?
No, and
what they were doing then.
What is also a statement of fact, Honorable Nyoro, is that your campaign team said that it never had impact on us, address the problem. That was the clarion call to the government of then. And that is a statement of fact as well.
Let me also just buttress that point again. The fact of the matter is that Russia and Ukraine were the #1 exporters to other countries of wheat. And also the top #1 in terms of edible oils.
But you deny the effect.
That is a fact. Let me just explain.
Did you deny or did you not? That is
the difference between what we are doing and what they did is a distinguishing factor. What they did then was to try and subsidize the consumption. What we are doing now, and you'll see in a very few days after the bumper harvest, is that we are incentivizing production. And that now have a spiral effect in terms of multiplier. And the difference between subsidizing consumption and the difference of subsidizing production is that when you subsidize the consumption aid, there is nothing you are doing in terms of multiplier. But when you incentivize production, a shilling becomes several more. And that is what we are doing. And we are tackling the cost of living on that basis. Not frivolous statements.
Asante na bila shaka wakati ule wa kampeni tulikuwa na ahadi nyingi sana. Miongoni mwa ahadi hizi ni kwamba ushuru wa mafuta ungepunguzwa. Aliyekuwa anagombea kiti cha urais wakati ule ambaye ni rais wa sasa alisema ushuru ambao umewekewa mafuta ni mwingi sana, na wakati wa debate pia kataja aina nyingi za aina tofauti za ushuru huu, na ambao alisema kwamba utapunguzwa, badala yake ni 16%. Lakini tuingie kwake Sam Gituko na Nimro Tabu, labda tupate wataalamu wanasema nini kuhusiana na swala hili la gharama ya maisha.
Naam, Lincoln na Ayub, kusema ukweli wataalamu umesikiza yote hao, walikuwa wanatingisha vichwa, kwa hivyo wana kauli nyingi za kuzungumzia. Lakini kwa kweli Davis Tayo, wakati wa kampeni hata baada ya uchaguzi lugha ilikuwa tamu kuhusiana na kupunguza gharama ya maisha. Tuzungumzie tu swala la kuongezwa kwa VAT katika bidhaa za mafuta. Serikali inatumia hesabu gani ambazo nyinyi wataalamu hamjui kwamba wakati VAT itapandishwa kutoka 8% mpaka 16%, wao bado wanadai kwamba gharama ya maisha itashuka? Ili hali tunafahamu wakati bidhaa za mafuta zinapokuwa ghali, maisha gharama yake inapanda. Wanatumia hesabu gani?
Mimi naona wamelenga pale matumizi yako kwa cash. Kwa sababu ukiangalia matumizi mengi katika kununua mafuta, watu ulipa tu cash, na ile tax inachukuliwa mapema na ni haraka. Kwa hivyo wakiongeza pale wanapata pesa nyingi, na pale kwingine imepunguzwa kama pale kwa rental, bado kuna kizungumkuti pale kukusanya ile rental tax. Kwa hivyo kuna kazi nyingi inafaa kufanywa pale kukusanya pale, na sasa wakipunguza ile effect haisikiki sana. Kwa hivyo serikali inaangalia ni wapi itapata ile quick wins, na hapo ndo unaona pale zile kiwango kimeongezeka. Na pia ningependa kusema ukiangalia mipango yote ya serikali na vile tunang'ang'ana kuelewa na kusikia sasa, kuna kitu ambacho mimi naona kwamba ile communication kutoka upande wa serikali si clear sana, na hapo nafikiria kuna kazi, na si mambo ya bajeti peke yake. Lazima watafute mbinu, vile walikuwa wanaongea na sisi vizuri wakati wa campaign, waendelee kutuambia hii pole narudi kwa housing levy, zile project ambazo zishaanza kufanywa ni kiwango gani cha ajira imetengenezwa. Sasa watu waanze kuamini, kuona kwamba yale ambayo yamepeanwa yanafanyika, na watu wanaona tukiongeza gear pale mambo itakuwa mazuri. La pili, ningependa kuuliza kama waziri anasikiza pale na kila mtu, kuna hii shida ya pending bills.
Lakini masuala yanawiana na gharama ya maisha.
Yanawiana. Pending bills ni kampuni ambazo zilifanya kazi na sasa hazijalipa wafanyikazi. Sasa unatuambia utachukua pesa zingine ufanye project zingine. Sasa watu wanashindwa kuelewa hapa itakuwa vipi. Hii gharama ya unambona unatupeleka unasema utatengeneza ajira ndio watu wapate pesa, mapato yao yaongezeke waweze kupata chakula, ni vipi? Kuna ile program ambayo ilikuwa itengeneze ajira ya vijana na walemavu na kina mama, ile ya AGPO, kwamba matumizi yote ya serikali 30% itaenda pale. Tunasema hiyo program imekufa. Ndio sasa tunaangalia kwamba kazi zingine zitoke katika mambo ya nyumba, na vile Kwame alisema shida ni Wakenya wapate mapato.
All right, Davis, I hear you, but let's strictly focus on the cost of living, and especially, Kwame, if you talk about VAT on fuel. And there has been arguments that have been given. The president says that there has been people that have been manipulating the system. You need to iron out all the differences so that you're able to properly manage it. And also, we know the cost of production highly depends on the cost of power, cost of energy. So what does this do? And what is this pressure that the government would be at such a time, to the extent that they have to yield to raise it to 16%?
Okay, let's start with I think some facts that have been stated by Ndindi Nyoro. He said that petroleum is imported. We don't have local sources of petroleum. It is a product that is bought at the international market and bought with Kenya, rather in dollars. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the trouble, whether it's the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the troubles generally globally, the price, okay, they're coming down now, but the prices had started to go up. And then we had a subsidy last year, again, which was a bad policy mistake. And so we are at the point where every time the government subsidizes, it actually has more money that it needs to spend. And the one thing that is also a problem with petroleum in Kenya is government tells you it's subsidizing, but there are almost 5-6 lines of taxes instead of reducing those taxes.
Right.
So you have the excise. I mean, you have all those levies related to fuel. Now, what we have today is, it's true. If you raise the price, VAT, rate of VAT on fuel per litre from 80% to 16%. We expect that if that happens, and of course the next time it is announced, if this part of the bill is approved, then obviously it will raise the prices. And the point is we have a VAT law which says that every time value is added. We need this difficult conversation in Kenya, and it requires honesty, for why other things, including very essential items that people buy, should have VAT at 16% and petroleum at 8%. I know that the argument is that once you have VAT on petroleum, it's going to raise prices. There's a knock-on effect on everything else, but that's true for everything else. So our view is, yes, there's a big distortion when you have fuel at 8% on VAT and others at 16%. And what it's telling us is that the VAT at 16% perhaps is too high for everything else. So the standard rate for VAT, there's nothing in our textbook or and we've cited holy books, and this was a prayer day, so let me say, there's nothing in the Bible that says that VAT, or any other religious book, that says that VAT must only be 16%. But I think it is not good policy to distort policy by saying, remember, liquefied petroleum gas, which is LPG, will be at 0. All those things that come from fuel, whether it's kerosene and all those things, they come from the same refinery process. So they come from one refinery process, and then you are charging one at 0 and the others at 8 and 16. You're actually creating a market distortion, which needs to be leveled. It is also not true that I think poorer people and lower income households will bear a cost, but most of the fuel are actually absorbed by private vehicles. So when you are subsidizing fuel or keeping the VAT low, thinking that you are helping poorer households, actually most of the value is appropriated by high income people and people who own private vehicles.
Right.
So here is a problem again in which I think the policy, in my view, in terms of equating the rate of VAT and bringing it to a standard level is correct, but I think 16% is too high.
Okay.
So yes, that's a difficult one.
Okay, I hear you. And of course, we'll come back to the experts who are still here in studio. But first, we need to cross over to the town hall studio, Trevor and Rashid, to speak to the stakeholders on that side.
Thanks, Sam and Nimrod. Let's get straight into it. And Eric Omondi, you've heard what the government is saying in terms of the cost of living. We've seen you on the streets before protesting on this, and you even went to Parliament trying to submit some memoranda. Moses Kuria says it now boils down to the parliamentarians, and they're saying they could not subsidize production. They could not subsidize consumption. They had to subsidize production. Are you buying that argument?
No. First of all, thank you very much for this platform. And Trevor, I believe this is the right place to call out the Kenya Kwanza government, because we all had them on the campaign trail. They promised Kenyans a cheaper life, a better life, and an easier life. the Kenya Kwanza campaign, specifically the president, said, huyu mama mboga, huyu mutu wa boda boda. Trevor, you said yourself, I've been arrested 4 times. And while in there, I've met boda boda operators and mama mbogas who have been arrested for petty offenses. They're in their thousands. Yeah? And today we are having the wrong conversation. We are talking about housing. Even at creation, God created Adam and Eve. And the first thing God gave Adam and Eve was water and food. They didn't even have clothing. Yeah? And for humans to survive, from what I studied from my lower education from primary, there is food, there is shelter, and then there is clothing. Today we're talking about housing. Trevor, there are no homeless people in Kenya. Even my uncle who lives in Kibera, and my cousin who lives in Kenya lives under a shelter. But there are thousands of families and children who are going hungry. The conversation should be about the high cost of living that President William Ruto, then a candidate, promised Kenyans. And we must call out the government and the president specifically for lying to Kenyans. Because this has been a culture of government after government, where you come and use words. You say, hii serikali itakuwa ya wamama. Na wewe mtu wa boda boda. Na tutapangwa. Na tutahakikisha. They promised us a better life, an easier life, and a cheaper life, and we have the records. And today the conversation has changed, the narrative has changed. We are talking about housing. There are no Kenyans who are homeless.
There are some of them, Eric, but they say the cost of living is a ripple effect of even the entire globe.
Kenyans who are homeless. I'm not talking about street children. I was watching a documentary about poverty in America. And they have hobos, homeless people. You can correct me if I'm wrong. We're talking about informal settlements like Kibra. But I personally don't know about Kenyans who are actually homeless. As you're speaking here tonight, Trevor, you as Royal Media promises news at 9. You cannot then broadcast Inspector Mwala at 9 and tell us wacha tuanze na hii kwanza. Yeah? We are having the wrong conversation.
Okay. All right. Pass the microphone back then. Let's talk about the cost of living. Yes, Raj.
Lakini pia labda kabla mpitishie kabla azungumze, nitamleta Steve ajibu swali la Eric Omondi, kwa sababu Steve nafikiri kidogo alafu tutampa dada yetu aweze kuchangia. Steve, mlikuwa na ule mpango wa nyumba kule Soweto, Kibera. Na kama anavyosema Eric Omondi, mpango ulivyofanywa ulikuwa ni kwamba watu wapate nyumba, wawe na maisha mazuri na wapambane na gharama ya maisha. Baada ya mpango ule kukamilika, wananchi waliweza kukimu maisha yao ama bado walipambana na gharama ya maisha?
Asante sana Bwana Rashid. Ningependa kusema kwamba mimi ni mwakilishi wa wakazi wa kitongoji duni cha Kibera, Soweto East. Ratiba hii ilianza mwaka wa 2005 wakati wa serikali ya Grand Coalition. Na Bwana Kibaki na former Prime Minister walijenga manyumba kwa jumla 822 units. Wale waliotoka pale ndio ambao wanamiliki yale manyumba. Serikali ya Jubilee ilipokuja, ningependa kusema kwamba hawakuwa na priority when it comes to housing. Nilingangana sana kama chairman. Na nashangaa sana Prime Minister, yeye ndiye aliyenisaidia kutoa hii program wakati ilikuwa imekwama kwa Attorney General, kwa sababu kulingana na ratiba ya serikali, mradi wowote ambao unapita 5 billion yetu ya second phase ni 7.5 billion ilikuwa imekwama, lazima ipite kwa Attorney General. Na ni yeye ndiye ambaye alitusaidia kuitoa pale kupitia kwa mjumbe wetu ambaye ni Member of County Assembly. Ningependa kusema hivi, sisi ambao tunatoka kwenye vitongoji duni, kuna mateso mengi. Hawa watu mnaona wakipinga mpango ya nyumba, haswa mimi sizungumzii uchumi, nitazungumzia nyumba. Ni kwa sababu wengi wanaishi kwenye manyumba ambayo wako na vyoo ama bed ama toilets kama 4-5 kwa nyumba moja. Kwa lugha ya mtaa tunawaita masmoothie. Na ndio maana wanaletewa affordable housing. Lakini sisi watu wa vitongoji duni yetu imekuwa tailor made, ni social houses. Na ningependa kusema hivi, tayari vile tunazungumza, Rais Ruto mwaka uliopita October 25th alikuja ka launch the second phase, kwa sababu Uhuru Kenyatta priority yake ilikuwa na mabarabara, lakini Ruto alipoingia October 25th alilaunch the second phase pale Soweto Zone B, ambayo tunajengewa tayari sasa manyumba 4058 units. Tayari 4 blocks zimeshaanza kujengwa. Ningependa kusema hivi, hiyo tu ndio njia pekee ya mkaaji wa kitongoji duni ataweza kumiliki nyumba. Kwa hivyo sisi tunaiunga mkono kikamilifu 100%, lakini chini Bwana Rashid, chini
kadhaa ndio tupate wengi wachangia.
Na wapatia. Chini ya ratiba ya social housing, sio affordable housing. Affordable housing ya wafanyikazi wa serikali na wale ambao kwa lugha ya mtaa tunaita masmoothie, wale ambao wako na mavyo mingi. Pia sisi tunataka tukue na vyumba ambavyo viko na vyo ndani.
As we pass the microphone to Maskela, there's a lady who had the microphone back there. Let's bring back the lady on this. And we're talking now about the cost of living. Are you confident that the government is addressing this in the right way?
My name is Shali Chipto.
Yes, go ahead.
My name is Shali Chipto. The cost of living in Kenya it's not good. We are feeling it. If you're earning, like say last year you're earning like 100,000. Right now the value of that 100,000 is like 20,000 shillings. You go to the supermarket and buy. You want to buy anything, you cannot afford to buy. What I'm asking the government or our president is to actually look at the mwananchi, because no one can afford whatever that is happening in the country right now. And I also want to speak as a business person. I'm a manufacturer. We cannot buy raw material right now. The cost of inputs has become really very expensive, and you cannot increase the prices of the products that you're manufacturing because the clients cannot afford to buy. So we are in this situation whereby we are thinking, what other business can we do?
Trevor, I'll give the mic just now. This is an opportunity for us as young people. And talking about the finance bill, I'll give you the mic just now. The president ordered that content creators, the clause on content creators tax should be omitted. Yeah, and I'd love to say this live on TV that order we will follow it. We will ensure that the president's order is adhered to.
Okay. Na bila shaka Eric tutakuja, maana kana kwamba hapa kila mtu anataka kuchangia. Naona pia kidogo tu hapa, pengine kidogo tu kwa dakika moja tutakwenda kwa upande ule wa pili. Tukirudi nafikiri pia kuna watu wa wazalishaji pale kutoka KAM wataweza kuchangia, kuna KMPDU wataweza kuchangia, kuna wanawakilisha wasanii upande wa pili wataweza kuchangia. Nafikiri kwamba mtupe dakika moja tupate kauli moja mbili kutoka kwa Jeff na Lulu, na itabidi kivyo vyote vile turudi hapa, maana ni wengi watakaweza kuchangia, angalau 3 4 waweze kutoa maoni kuhusu gharama ya maisha, alafu tusonge mbele.
Lulu.
Na mshukran sana, kama alivyosema Rashid ni kwamba kila mtu anataka kuchangia kutoka studio tofauti ikiwemo ile studio ya Tarling.
Absolutely, that's why this is the big conversation, right?
Kabisa. Lakini kuna baadhi ambao wanachangia kupitia mitandao, na kama tunaweza kusoma jumbe 2-3 kuhusiana na conversation leo yetu, the big conversation. Hapa Danyuga 8 kupitia mtandao wa Twitter anasema we are already with the cost of living and the finance bill 2023 has nothing to smile about. As a people, only the high and mighty will benefit from it. Ambrose K.E. anasema we as Kenya, we should learn from others, e.g. Greek under the Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis initiated a gradual and promising recovery due to a series of reforms, tax cuts and investment promises. These measures eventually lead to growth.
Absolutely.
Na mwingine ya tatu anasema kwani kazi ni ya mjengo ndio serikali nafikiria pekee, ilhali wanasababisha wasomi wakose kazi directly in the government and also in the private sector by imposing more taxes until they close. Huyu ni Lemiso M.
All right.
Naam, ndio baadhi ya maswali. Natumai kwamba tutayapitisha kwa expert studio, lakini kabla hapo naarifiwa kwamba jumbe zimekuwa nyingi.
There are tweets coming in thick and fast, Lulu, thick and fast. Let's see them coming up. Shoka Mori says, is the government doing slum upgrading for the 7 million slum dwellers, or is it affordable housing project financed by 3 million employees for more than 10 million Kenyans who don't own homes? Good question there. Honorable Nyagaka says, let the president go ahead and implement whatever he wants about the finance bill, but can the president assure us that corruption will not rise up again. Kenyans are only scared because of the fear of corruption. And Lawrence Mose says, the problem is not the housing program, but the funding of the program. Keep those tweets coming, folks. Remember, the hashtag is the big conversation.
I think swali hilo moja ndio tulipeleke kwa the expert studio. Wanasema kwamba the problem is not the housing program, but the funding
of the program.
Labda tuende kwa Ayub na Lincoln Jogu, muulize labda wao wataalamu walioko hapo upande wa serikali. Wameulizwa maswali mengi, wana yapi ya kujibu?
Thank you, Lulu. Thank you, Jeff. And this is the government center where representatives are responding to questions from Kenyans. And the beauty about it is the growth of the democracy in having all the sides contribute to this. And earlier on, P.S. Hinga, you had a thought about it. And you were nodding your head, certainly not in agreement as to what the experts have said, and also one of the views from our town hall session. What are your thoughts?
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to ask our experts, the economists, Kwame specifically. You know, sometimes they almost try and paint government as though we are clueless and we are just lazy and we just wake up and we just do things without thinking. And I think that is wrong. I have here and have published it. It's actually a public document. We have gone and done studies in countries that have solved the housing problem and countries that also made mistakes. I have here 10 countries. Out of the 10, only 3 didn't have the mandatory contribution. You have got Singapore, which some Gituku almost belittled, that we are looking at, we are not comparing apples
to apples. He never belittled, he just compared.
17% employer, 20% employee. Out of that combined 37, 23 goes to housing. You have got a country like even Cameroon, 1.5%. You have Nigeria, 2.5%. You have got Mexico, it's at 8%. You have got Brazil, which is at 8%. I wish you can also compare maybe the population of Brazil and Kenya. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because there is no country in the world today that is progressive, that is not having this conversation about addressing the matters of housing. Even the US. Even when you hear about those companies, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, they have almost a guarantee of about $1 trillion shillings from the US government to deal with issues of housing. So this is not an abstract conversation. That's number one. Number two, it is important to understand the economics of housing. Because again, I think we lose the conversation, because whenever you have an economic crisis and everybody's saying create jobs, how do you create jobs? You must have a deliberate plan to create jobs. And this deliberate plan, ours, it's called extended public works, whereby you take the house and you disaggregate it into components. We have got 69 items that are ring-fenced that would be produced locally because they are produced here. But what we keep on missing, and this is what I find the disconnect with our experts, is they misunderstand the whole concept of large economies of scale. So yes, if you're building 500 houses here, 200, you will never get the large economies of scale. Manufacturing is going to be the biggest beneficiary of this program, because every component in the house is like a manufacturing opportunity. So you don't manufacture.
You will proceed to the manufacturing part. I understand that the CEO of the Institute of Economic Affairs, Kwame Weno, has a question for you, and this is his direct question to you as to what he said, your response, and what he perhaps may have about your submissions here. Yes, Kwame.
All right, CS Hinga, I don't think people in government are clueless. I actually think sometimes you guys act too clever. That's the problem. But let me tell you, you mentioned a number of countries. So you left out Venezuela, which also started. Singapore, comparing to Kenya, is a city-state. I mean, 600, it's just slightly smaller than Nairobi. I mean, slightly larger than Nairobi. So obviously, we are not comparing like for like. The income levels when the housing fund started in Singapore was 3 times what it is in Kenya today. So maybe we need that as correction. But let me tell you, you mentioned a number of countries, including Brazil. Have you heard of something called favelas?
Yes.
It's still in Brazil as well. So how comes they haven't solved the housing problem? All I'd like us to be honest about is, when you have the income per capita per person in Kenya at $2,000 at 400, the kind of houses, the problem you're trying to solve is not a housing problem. It is an income problem to begin with. Secondly, I think that I never call myself an expert in anything, but the economics of housing I understand well. In fact, even in 2017, I started to follow this issue. So maybe we should respect one another's knowledge around that area. I'm just saying this. We have the National Housing Corporation, which still exists, and there are laws. It's been there. Housing reform should start by asking ourselves, if the National Housing Corporation exists and it hasn't solved this problem. Remember, there's even a government program that was started for workers, for government workers, which government finally adopted. And then I come to the model of funding that you have proposed, asking people like me and everybody else to put in that money. When 7 years pass, you will be unable to pay out 700 billion shillings. So basically, the housing need, we don't debate. Your financing model, as you've explained it, and then the sneaky way in which you're bringing in rules before the laws and everything else through this funding bill, suggests to us that we are actually trying to shoot fast, and then you decide thereafter whether we've reached the higher target. So that's what worries me. I respect the professionalism within government, but I have to tell you that the economics about this and the funding model, you've got them wrong.
Singer, please, go ahead.
Yeah, first of all, let me also disabuse a point that he made earlier on, because we have had 2 rounds of bidding where we have published various parcels of land. The first round, we had 59 parcels of land, and it was largely around Nairobi and those other areas. I had 102 bids. Then we published parcels of land in other parts of the country. 50 parcels of land in the areas of Bungoma, Nyamira, the Western Block side, and some in central Kenya. We only had 2 bidders. Okay? So the notion that you can just tell the investors, you come and build. And he says something which is correct about National Housing Corporation. It is true that since the 1960s, National Housing Corporation did very well. Why did it do well? Because National Housing Corporation was funded by government. Until the late 80s, when we had the structural adjustment, and IMF and the World Bank told us exit from these areas. Since then, National Housing Corporation has not received a cent from national government. Even if you look at this budget, there is not a single cent that is going to National Housing Corporation. What does that mean? We outsourced the entire housing agenda to the private sector. And what they did, and there's nothing wrong with the private sector, because the private sector is after a profit. And what they've done is that they have focused on the 3% and they left out the other 97%. So it is a high time somebody has to fight for Pastor Baraza and the likes of the people in other places, because they too have a right. And by the way, Egypt in 2014 made it a birthright to own a home. Since then, they have built 800,000 homes. So
asante. Bila shaka maswali ni mengi sana na tunatumai kwamba tunapoendelea zaidi mwananchi anapata ufafanuzi zaidi kuhusu maswali haya. Katika ukumbi ambao tuna wale walio katika sekta tofauti na ambao kwamba pia wana maswali ambayo wangependa kuyauliza kwa maafisa wa serikali tulionao hapa katika studio.
Well, thank you, Lincoln and Ayub. There's a heated conversation here. Let me show you just by a show of hands. How many people here want to say something? Let me see by a show of hands. All right. Now, I can assure you we are not going to keep this promise because we are running out of time. But I'll start with Maskela. Very briefly, just 1 minute each, make your comments on the cost of living very fast. Yes.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the workers of this country, life has become very hard on everybody. And government has not even raised the pay slips. And for us, sometimes as unions and workers, we try to ask government just to be considerate that we are okay, we are not demanding of so much of you to give us a pay rise, but don't deduct the little we are receiving. Yeah? Okay. And worst of all now as a doctor is that beyond the cost of living, there's something called cost of falling sick and cost of dying in this country.
All right.
Right now it becomes so expensive and the NHF is no longer paying because they're running short.
Okay.
Sometimes as workers, when we disagree with the president and on some issues, we ask of you, please don't send the police to arrest or tear gas us. That's just our way of expressing ourselves, and then we reach to a point that we can all agree.
All right.
Thank you.
Johi, very briefly.
Thank you so much. From manufacturing, we support part of the bill and others we don't support. So I'm going to just state quickly. On 10% export and investment promotion levy, we are supportive of it, but we are saying that it should be charged on finished goods that fall under the CET, EAC CET at that 5%, rather than on intermediate products and raw materials. As far as change from exempt, from zero rated to exempt, there are some inputs like in the pharmaceutical sector, in pest control products, and also in sugarcane transportation.
Okay.
This is going to affect the cost of production. The other one is on disallowing the invoices that have not been generated through e-teams. So we are saying that those should be allowed because the hustlers are going to suffer.
All right, please pass the microphone back here to this lady over there, and then give us your brief comments very fast.
Yeah, my comment is on the digital content creators.
Yes.
The president said that the 15% content monetization will be reviewed, and we are going to hold him accountable and hope it's going to be below 5%, like any other professional service in Kenya.
Thank you very much. We'll start with your name.
Yes. Lucy, talking about slums. Eli kanasema hakuna watu wa slums. Mimi nimetoka huko. So akusema ati hakuna watu wanaishi nje, tunaishi, and I know guys are there. So mimi na support hii issue ya wajenge manyumba, watu wapate pesa. Na makazi zijengwe. Juu hadi kujenga manyumba bado inasaidia sana.
Saidia na microphone hapa kidogo tuweze kupitisha kwa huyu dada ambaye anawakilisha wale muungano kidogo ndio tuweze kupata fursa kila mtu angalau azungumze mawili matatu. Kwa dakika moja.
Hi, I'm Washuka. I am here to say that even you as the media services have failed us big time as a country, because you are so deep into telling us what is wrong about the finance bill instead of interpreting to us. Go to the Luhyas, the local media services in Luhya. Go to them, tell them unga ya ugali haitakuwa inatatsiwa. Tell them in the language they understand.
What do you understand from the finance bill?
I understand that unga will not be taxed, and the imported goods will be cheaper.
Na usikiza radio zetu za lugha tofauti tofauti. Maana tunatangaza hiyo katika radio zetu tofauti tofauti. Kwa hiyo usikize kuanzia kesho, tunachambua kama tunavyochambua sasa hivi.
Okay.
Asante sana.
Na nataka kumsaidia kwa ile mwelekezo anasema kuna no taxation on fertilizers ambaye ina boost ukiwa fertilizers raw material haipati VAT. Inasaidia wakulima kupanda hizi vitu, mmea na chakula iongezeke kwa nchi. Pia upande wa fuel na mafuta, we are looking at stabilizing the prices and see it reducing. The prices has been going up since every 15 of every month. So taxing 16% in the long run will stabilize the prices of the fuel. Na pia kutoa kerosene, watu wanatumia LPG kwa manyumba. LPG is not taxed. Wanataka kutoa VAT on LPG. So tukiangalia watu wenye wanaenda kutafuta mafuta taa, itakuwa favorable kwa wale wanatumia gas kwa manyumba. Kama haitumiwi LPG inatumika kwa manyumba. Asante sana.
Tupe fursa.
Mimi nitaenda haraka.
Huyo jamaa hapo katikati.
Mimi nitaenda haraka. Watu wa media, I'll repeat what she has said. You guys, you need to tell us the good part of this finance bill. Over 20 bills on this bill has reduced the VAT part. But ile watu wana focus nayo ni ya house peke yake. House is 3%. Kuna zenye zimetoa la reduce hata kuliko hiyo 3%. Why do we have to focus on 3%? And the last thing I want to say is that in every house, it reach a point where you have to make hard decision so that you can save the next life. The media need to make the hard decision and to understand that we have a government that is in place. We have a government that is working. You need to come up in a point whereby you don't report only the bad point, the bad things about the government. We have good things government is doing. We have great and good plans the government is doing. Not only the small things that you are making them to be issues, and there is no issue on them.
Okay,
Thank
Naftali.
You.
Okay.
I'll quickly touch on how government is funded. Government is funded through tax, through savings, borrowing, and this leads to investments. Government does not do business. Government is not employed. Where does government get the money? Taxation. They will tax the employed. They will tax the business people. Government, it should be very clear that government does not keep the money. It is money in, money out. If there is no money in, government can shut down. How will government raise money? I do know very well we are from a pandemic. It's been a pandemic. Yeah. There is a global crisis. We have had a drought.
Are you comfortable with the cost of living as it is right now? You're comfortable?
I'm not comfortable with the cost of living, but what I need to state is this. These are ups and downs of life. Okay. Whereby we are from a pandemic, we have had a drought, we have a global crisis to deal with, and the government cannot shut down. Government has to use the available means to fund itself, to fund the operations of government, do the transfers that are necessary to the vulnerable and the low-income earners so that they can support in the pyramid, the lower cadre of the pyramid. That's why it should be very clear to everyone. Yeah. Kindly, let us be human enough. Those who are working, government has provided you with the infrastructure. If you are in business, kindly, it's okay.
Naam, shukran sana kuweza kutoa maoni. Nafikiri kwa kweli wengi hatuwezi kuzungumza sote, lakini mjadala unaweza kuendelea. Na kwa ndugu yangu ambaye anasema kwamba wanahabari wafanye zaidi, sidhani kama kuna zaidi ya hili. Maana hili limetoa fursa kila mtu waliounga mkono, wanaopinga wazungumze. Nafikiri kwamba tunasema mgala muwe lakini haki yake mpya. Nafikiri hili linakufundisha kwamba wanahabari wanaangalia mbele zaidi mustakabali wa taifa, wala sio misimamo ya mirengo wala misimamo ya kisiasa. Mtazamaji, ni mengi tutaweza kuyazungumzia, lakini kwanza kabisa tuelekee aliko Ayub Abdikadri na aliko Njogu na serikali watupe yale ambayo wanayozungumzia kwa sasa.
Maoni ni mengi sana na maswali ni mengi sana ambayo yameelekezwa kwa wale maafisa ambao wanasimamia vitengo tofauti ndani ya serikali ya Kenya Kwanza. Na tutazungumza naye Kimani Kuri ambaye ni mwenyekiti wa kamati ya bunge kuhusiana na masuala ya fedha na pia mipango. Na kuna masuala mawili ambayo ningependa bwana Kimani uweze kuyazungumzia. Mwanzo kabisa Kwame alizungumzia na kupendekeza kwamba hii 16% VAT ni ya juu sana, kwamba ipunguzwe hadi 14% machini, kwamba 16% ni ya juu zaidi. Na swala la pili ni hili ambalo limependekezwa hapa kuhusiana na digital content. Hii hadi kwamba ushuru ambao ulikuwa umependekezwa 15% utapunguzwa. Ni kweli utapunguzwa au utapunguzwa katika mipangilio ulionayo?
Asante sana, lakini naomba nikujibu kwa lugha ya Kiingereza kwa sababu I would like to call out on misaccuracies. I think it was Tuko who told us that there is a 16% VAT on compensation, insurance compensation. Now, how I had some of people, Kenyans, put it is that if, for example, I get compensated because I had an accident and I get compensated with one leg, then we are saying that we cut part of that leg. But you know, I have been carrying this finance bill like a Bible, and I had to really go and check what is it really provided in the bill. And it is not true that we are going to tax compensation on insurance. So what we are actually saying is, if, for example, you have insured this...
Korea, we will proceed with the point. Allow us to cross over to CS Moses Korea, who is in the Belarusian capital. To finish up with him, we release him because he has a flight to catch back home. On the same questions, CS Korea, and there are a vast array of questions that have been raised. For example, my question to you is, why does the government need more funding, yet the housing project which was in progress has grown by threefold to 1,390 units in the same period?
That we have to take bold decisions. Hakuna nchi imeendelea bila kuchukua hatua ambazo mwanzo zinaonekana kama ni za upumbavu, lakini mwishowe watu wanafurahia. Nipende kwa mfano, juzi tulikuwa tunachekelewa watu wanapeana fertilizer, sijui wakulima wanataka fertilizer fulani inaitwa DAP, Aisa akasema hiyo fertilizer itaharibu mimea yetu na udongo yetu. Sasa hii tuna wakulima, watu wanajipiga selfie wakiwa pale kuvuna mahindi ambayo hajawahi kuvuna. Hakuna serikali ambayo inaweza kupeleka nchi mbele bila kuchukua hatua ambazo sio lazima mwanzoni sikuwe zinaungwa mkono na kila mtu. Na mimi niko na hakika hii mswada itapita, na hao watu ambao wanatuingilia watakuja tu pia kutusherekea, kwa sababu wanajua vile wanafanya. Na mimi nasema hivyo kama mtu ambaye anatembea dunia mzima, na nimeona nchi mingi, nchi ambazo hapa Belarus pahali niko saa hii, nchi ya watu milioni 9 peke yake wanauza chakula nje ya bilioni ya dola 8 billion dollars. Sisi wa Kenya tunaagiza chakula kutoka nje $4 billion. Nchi ya watu milioni 9 inatulisha dunia mzima, kwa sababu siku moja walichukua hatua ambazo sio za kusherekea. Na pia tuache unafiki. Nimesikia watu wengine kama rafiki yangu Mheshimiwa Raila Odinga sahihi anaingilia mpango. Wakati ndugu yake Uhuru Kenyatta walikuwa na ushirika na yeye ndiye alikuwa kwa mstari wa mbele kutetea hii housing project. Hii tu bado anapinga. Unafiki hauwezi kupeleka Kenya mbele.
Okay.
Na lazima pia tukue watu ambao tunajilinganisha na dunia mzima. Nimesikia Eric Omondi ambaye amesema ni kijana. Na miaka 7 iliyopita nilichukua pesa yangu nikampeleka Amerika dione dunia vile iko. Na saa hii vile naongea, afadhali ningetumia hiyo pesa kwa sherehe, sababu sioni kama kuna kitu alisema. Kwa hiyo mimi nataka kusema ya kwamba tuchukue ile hatua ambao inaweza kupeleka Kenya mbele. Hapo mbele sisi tutaangalia ana kwa ana, na mpiga kura atatukosoa, atatuambia vile.
Thank you. Allow me to get an answer to my question, because certainly that wasn't the answer to my question. And I quoted the Economic Survey report of 2023, and this is what the report said. That in 2022, while the number of residential housing units completed by the State Department for Housing, which is headed by Piers Hinga here, increased more than threefold to 1,390 units in the same period. If you accomplished thrice with the previous funding, why do you need another funding model to fund the same project?
Ndugu yangu, tunaongea mambo ya manyumba karibu nusu milioni kuelekea milioni 1. Wewe unaongea mambo ya nyumba 1000. Huko ni kama kulinganisha usingizi na kifo. Tunaongea pesa mingi, tunaongea mradi kubwa, tunaongea mamilioni ya makazi ya vijana wetu. Sio kutoka sijui mia kadhaa koda kwa 1000. Huu mradi, na sababu mimi ndio nimepewa jukumu ya kuongea na wawekezaji kutoka nje, unahitaji pesa mingi, na wale wawekezaji nimeongea na wao wako tayari kuleta mabilioni ya pesa katika Kenya. Ile wanasema tu nipatie hakikisho ya kwamba kwanza nikijenga hizo nyumba nitajaribu kuziuza. Nisipoweza kuziuza, nipatie hakikisho ya kwamba serikali inaweza kunipatia ile guarantee kwamba wanaweza kuita ile hinga kwa kizungu yake mingi naita off taking. Hiyo ni kusema ya kwamba serikali itanunua hizi nyumba kutoka kwa wawekezaji, ndio pia mwekezaji apate kuwa na ile comfort. Na unajua mimi ndio waziri wa wawekezaji, lazima niwaangalie kwa macho, niwaambie pesa yako haipotei. Kwa hivyo kwa ufupi ni kusema ya kwamba ile ambao hiyo survey imesema tunaongea mambo ya nyumba 1000. Ile mradi ambao tunataka kufanya ni mradi ambao itajenga karibu takriban nusu milioni nyumba kwenda juu, na kwa hivyo ni gharama ambayo iko juu sana.
Asante sana Mheshimiwa Moses Kuria, na una safari njema urejeapo nyumbani. Tuarejea kwake Sam Gituko, atuelezee mengi zaidi kuhusiana na kile ambacho wale wataalamu wanakizungumzia. Bila shaka utakuja kwetu hapa kwa masuala ambayo hatujaweza kuyajibu, lakini kwanza tuende kwake Sam Gituko, kisha mawazo aliyokuwa nayo mheshimiwa utaendeleza. Asante. Sam.
All right, thank you, Ayub and Lincoln. And of course, many things that are contained in the finance bill that we still continue to look into. For instance, on the cost of doing business. If you look at the turnover tax that is being proposed to rise from 1% to 3% of the turnover, there's also a change, because currently the range that applies, that rate of 1% applies, is those people that are able to make 1 million shillings to 50 million shillings per annum in their businesses. That is being proposed to go down to 500,000 shillings to 15 million shillings per year. What does that mean? If you work for 365 days, that means every single day of the year, you're being targeted if you make 1,370 shillings every single day. This will be taxed at 3%. Let's just take a look at what that would be. Daily earnings, of course, between 1,370 and 41,000 for those that are earning 15 million shillings from their businesses. The turnover tax for a person making 500,000 shillings in a year, the turnover tax that you pay is 15,000 shillings. For the person making 15 million shillings, the turnover tax will be 450,000 shillings. But of course, this is payable every month. Now, the SMEs that are above 15 million shillings, that is, those that were previously under this band will now be taxed based on 30% on their profits. Something else that you need to know is that as far as the digital content tax, then you've seen Eric Omondi around. 15% of the payments is supposed now to be taxed, but there has been conversations that have been going into this. Let me ask you, former Senator Kero, if you look first of all at the turnover tax that is being proposed, of course, there has been this ambition by the government to bring everyone on board. What challenges does this pose, especially going to enforce it for people that are earning the much that is being targeted this time?
Yeah, the essence of tax is that it must be simple, it must be predictable, and it must be easy to collect administratively. You cannot have a tax regime which is very difficult to implement. I think the challenge with turnover tax is you are targeting essentially what the government has been calling Mamamboga and the hustlers. These are the people you are targeting. And I think that narrative has been there for the last 9 months since this government came to power. You remember when the president said, everyone who's 18 and above as an ID has to pay tax. Or everyone who is on Safaricom, 30 million, why should only be 6-7 million be taxpayers? So that narrative that everyone must pay tax, I think is wrong. I think everywhere in the world, tax has a threshold. Because people earn income in order to improve their well-being. People have other needs. People have needs. They have children to go to school. They have, they have medical challenges. They have a lot. So if the government should not always believe that they know how to look after the lives of Kenyans. So that you say, give us the tax, we will know how to look after you. No, I think we should allow Kenyans to have disposable income in their pockets. But let me just also in the same breath say that there are some issues which have been mentioned here which are not really correct. There's all over the world, subsidies are there. We should not be told that subsidies should not be there on consumption. In Europe, from 2021 up to now, all the governments in Europe have spent over 800 billion euros in subsidies, including on VAT cuts on petrol and on energy and many other things to make the cost of living cheaper because of what has happened in wherever. So it happens on food, on fuel. You can actually to make the lives of people cheaper by providing subsidies. I think you cannot say the government finds it comfortable to give subsidy to Kenya Power and Lighting, which is making profit in that particular year. You remember 2 years ago, the government gave a lot of money, over 7 billion. That same year, KPLC made 3 billion for Ndindi Oro and his other shareholders. Kenya Airways has taken nearly 50 billion. It is okay for the government to give subsidy to institutions and other, people that are paid, Uchumis and many other companies. But they find it difficult to provide subsidy to somebody who is starving, who needs to get a few shillings in order to be able to buy food. But lastly, I want to comment on the issue of cost of living. Cost of living, let me just say, is about the cost, the price of food in the market, the price of things in the market. And this price is based on the cost of production. And you have said in Mtugu very clearly, cost of production is affected by energy. It has gone up. 60% power and lighting has gone up in the last few months. The second one is power. The second one is taxes. So many taxes are going up. We don't have time to go through them. But I'm actually very disappointed that the people in manufacturing and other important sectors have not been given adequate time, because there are many areas in manufacturing where the taxes, excise duties and VATs and others that have been introduced, including 10% and so forth, is going to make things very expensive and the cost of production will be high. Lastly, fuel. So those three things, fuel going up, taxes going up, energy going up, you cannot expect to see cost of living going down. In fact, the macroeconomic indicators are all heading south. Interest is going up. Inflation is going up. Exchange rate is getting worse. The shilling is going to 140 plus. The fiscal deficit. So all indications, and I want to disagree with the minister, all the challenges we have had in this country, the reason why we are talking about lack of food insecurity, housing, medical, is governance.
Right.
They should know that the bottom line is we must address the issue of governance in this country. If they can tell us loud and clear that we are not going to deal with corruption, that's a governance issue. If they don't deal with the governance issue, we will be talking about housing, disease, education, all these problems for the next 50 years again. And I think that is the challenge that every government should address.
Okay. And Molen, looking at some of the excess taxes that are being proposed, including what they are calling the Export Investment Promotion Levy that will be imposed on imported clinker. And of course, knowing that we are going into the housing agenda, so you want to tax clinker coming from outside the country. What does that do? Does it help the local cement manufacturing sector, or does it make it favorable for certain companies and worse for others?
I think the intention is good, but look at it from this angle that while you are trying to protect the local manufacturers against importation, you're already making it very difficult for them to even produce, because already the cost of production at home is very high. So technically what you're saying is that even though you will introduce that import levy, still when somebody imports, it will be even cheaper because the cost of producing it locally is not cheap. And two things that have been mentioned that I would quickly go into so that we are not lost into it, that there is no taxation on LPG. There is what we call VAT exemption, but there is no tax. The issue of, that we are mixing two things here. When you say there is no taxation and when you say there is VAT exemption, those are two things. Mm-hmm. So what the government is proposing is that it's increasing VAT on fuel, but exempting LPG. So what that would mean then, therefore, is that they are exempted, fine, the cost will come down. But remember, the business owner is not allowed to claim input VAT. So technically, that means that the cost of LPG will still go up because that cost will be passed on to the consumer. Another thing is that let us look at the cost of living from the aspect of introduction of moving the TOT, turnover tax from 1% to 3%. Right. That if you are doing business and you are being told to pay upfront already an increment of about 2%. Ordinarily, those small businesses, when you look at their profit margin, it is really not more than around 5%. So putting in an advance collection of 3% would really not make it very easy in the cost of doing business, but that translates again to cost of living, because now you're already taking money away from me that then I cannot even now manage myself. The other aspect is that should not be lost unto us is the issue of what we call the proposal in the finance bill to have 20%. When you have a tax appeal, right? When you have a case, you have a tax case, and you want to appeal. The bill proposes that as a business owner, you are supposed to deposit 20% upfront of the tax, the disputed amount of tax. That would definitely mean that businesses will have very difficult times to raise that money. Liquidity will be a challenge. The next thing is that businesses will close, because look at Keroche. The amount of tax dispute that has been involved in that case is huge. Mm-hmm. So when you insist that the taxpayer deposits 20% upfront within 24 hours, actually, if to be very precise, it's within 24 hours, then you're creating a liquidity challenge in doing business. So I think those are issues that we have been overshadowed by the housing levy, and we've not looked at some of those things. And another quick one that probably we may not get time to speak about is we have the BETA, that is the bottom-up economic transformation agenda, that speaks to health as one of the things that the government wants to focus on. But you look at a proposal that initially in the previous finance bills, acts, we've not had corporation tax on companies that manufacture human vaccines. Yes. But now we are introducing a 10%. What you're technically making is that vaccines are going to be very expensive, making health not affordable. So I think we really need to look at those things and link them to what you are proposing in the bill.
Jam, kwa kifupi sana, manake naarifiwa muda wetu umekwisha. Kwa sekunde chache pengine, tumefika hapa kwa sababu tumeambiwa tuna madeni makubwa na serikali. Na hivyo basi lazima tugaramie sisi kwa utozaji ushuru wa zaidi na kadhalika. Lakini nafahamu mimi ni kwamba hakuna serikali ulimwenguni inaweza kujimudu bila madeni kiwango fulani. Itakushangaza kwamba siku za usoni tujikute tuko katika hali hii ngumu ya kulipia ushuru mkubwa zaidi na bado tuna madeni makubwa. Somo litakuwa ni lipi?
Asante. The
challenge we have with our public debt, we also have to look at it from the composition of what we borrowed. Because when we became a low middle income country, we quickly took up the opportunities that came with going to the commercial markets where we could borrow debt without too many conditions, but it's more expensive. And that has ramped up over time. And so it's not a problem to borrow. I think, there's always going to be a scenario where sometimes governments need to borrow. But the reason for what we borrow and from who we borrow has a big determinant on, so then what kind of implications in your debt repayment it will be. Because it's thinking about the interest rate at which you're borrowing. If you look at some of the multilaterals that we borrow from the World Bank, some of the interest rate is as low as 0.75%. If you look at some of the commercial debt that we borrow, some of it is as high as 6%. So that's one side of it. The second side of it is how quickly does that debt mature? Because in terms of government thinking about debt, you have to think of it in the long term so that you're able to spread your repayment. One of the things we didn't do very well is that. So there's a lot of debt that is falling due around the same time, and that puts a lot of pressure on government on then how much can you actually be able to settle. And so the challenge we saw in March of this year was one example of when we don't do that very well. So there's definitely a thinking that has to change within the country on, number one, what do we need to borrow for? Number two, who do we borrow from? And are those terms going to affect us in a negative way in future, or should we sometimes step back when we know the terms might not be very good?
Asante Joe.
All right, and of course there's so much still in the Finance Bill 2023. We don't want to cross back to Lulu and Jeff in the Monanche studio. Lulu, Jeff.
Sam, Nimrod, thanks so much. This conversation is really robust and it's great. We're getting so much feedback, Lulu. So much feedback.
Sana kabisa. Labda tuanze kusoma na upande wako.
Safi. Dennis Lamayan says, all what Kenyans are asking is make the voluntary first. Secondly, the management of the fund has to be open.
Okay, na Kiambu Finance anasema if the government could come up with clear understanding of how house finance will be used, then it's not a bad idea.
Absolutely. Just Claire 254 says, if I'm not guaranteed a house at the end of the day, then why am I forced to contribute to this housing levy?
Wow. Na Malika Tricks anasema, does Kuria and Hinga mean that the only jobs available for the Kenyan youths are in the mjengo sector? What about doctors, clinical officers, lawyers, bankers, and so on?
Yeah, good question. Peniel Sande says, the PS has mentioned that there is a social housing and there's affordable housing. How are they different when the main agenda is decent housing and creation of employment? Also, why is it mandatory? Lastly, how will the government ensure accountability of the taxpayers' money?
Ray Truth anasema, make our lives simple, not hard. Some are sleeping hungry. Feed the nation first. Affordable food sounds better.
Indeed. Nyamoya C says, I'm amazed by the PS Charles and CS. A very good example is the Buxton project. 1, the houses are unaffordable to lower income earner. 2, the Kazi kwa Vijana was never honored as every contractor came with their own workforce from Nairobi.
And Fred Makrego anasema, Mr. Hinga, do you have a home? Is that home built by government? Was that home built by our tax? We don't need such homes.
Lots and lots of reactions. Pelinet 22 says, this thing is simple. Let's hear the voice of Kenyans who are bosses, as they call us. Kenyans are against this bill because it will take away the little they get now to pay their bills. The little is what they depend on now. So uchumi kwanza, and the bill to come later.
Mwigai Willie anasema, I don't understand why the government is in a hurry to implement this house levy thing. I believe Kenyans are unable to feed themselves, and let's wait for the cost of living to be bearable to Kenyans. I believe the government is milking an already dead cow.
And Jao Georgie, the final tweet here, says, I would like to know from CS how the house levy or finance bill is going to create job opportunities for the youth, while the same finance bill is going to kill our talented youth who are trying to create their own jobs by taxing content creators. Lots and lots of reactions. So many. We cannot read all of them. There's so many.
Maswali ni mengi, Jeff, but I believe that this conversation cannot end here.
No, it cannot. We have to keep going.
Yeah.
So let's go to Ayub.
Ayub Abdul Kadir.
Yes.
And Lincoln Jogu.
In the government studio. Take it away, gentlemen.
Maoni mazuri sana hayo kutoka kwa Wakenya, na tunapomalizia mjadala huu mkuu, kwa sababu hatuwezi kuendeleza zaidi. Tunapomalizia kuna wazo kidogo ambalo Mheshimiwa Kimani Kuria hakuwa amelimalizia. Naomba nafasi hii Mheshimiwa uweze kulimalizia tunapotamatisha kwa muda tu mjadala huu mkuu.
Asante sana. Nilikuwa nasema kwamba there is a lot of misinformation wakati ambapo tunaweza kuelezea wananchi kuhusu these particular taxes, and I'll pick one that has been misreported, the VAT on insurance compensation. And that is, I carry this, I've been doing this for weeks now. So clause 30, what we're doing with that particular clause, if for example you have owned a shop, in that shop you have goods that you had paid VAT on when you're buying, that is input VAT. And then the insured, there's a risk that you insure that shop on of a fire, and the fire occurs and burns all your stock, okay? And then the insurance compensates you for the stock that got burnt in that shop. But again, so you take that money and buy new stock. You get to pay VAT twice. So that means that you will have asked for input VAT, for the reimbursement of input VAT twice. So what we are saying is that when you have been compensated for this, and that was a taxable product, then you do not claim VAT the second time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Kimani Kuria, the Chair of Finance and National Planning Committee of the National Assembly. The PS Housing, Charles Singer, thank you. David Ugenya, Honorable, the Member of Parliament representing Ugenya constituency, and Ndende Nyoro, the Kiharu lawmaker, who is the Chair of the Budget Committee of the National Assembly. We certainly are not ending this conversation. We are pausing this conversation, and we hand over to Sam Gituku and Nimro Tabo at the expert studio.
All right, thank you so much, Lincoln and Ayub there. We also want to thank our panelists here in studio for being here for those many hours, giving us your contributions, and much of it that has been appreciated even online. We want to thank you, former Senator Bill Okeru, and also former Finance Minister, Shadow Minister rather, during the Kanu regime. We also want to thank John Kinuthia, who is a Senior Program Manager at IBP Kenya. We also want to thank Davis Tayo, who is an economist, and also to thank Kome Wino, CEO at the Institute of Economic Affairs, and also want to thank one CPA, Molen Achayo from ISPAC. Thank you for making time for us of this conversation.
Na bila shaka wakati tunasema shukrani huku tunakumbuka kuna wenzetu pia lazima wafanye shukrani. Tunakwenda moja kwa moja kwa Rashid Abdalla na Trevor Mbija.
Naam, shukrani sana Nimrod Tabu na Sam Gitu. Kwa kweli anasema kwamba jambo zuri ukilifanya kwa muda mrefu linapoteza uzuri, linakuwa jambo la kawaida, lakini ukilisitisha ukija ukilifanya baadaye unaliongeza uzuri, linakuwa jambo zaidi kushinda la kawaida. Kwa hiyo nafikiri kufikia sasa tusasitisha, lakini tukirudi tutakuja na uzuri zaidi. Uzuri ikiwa ni mwananchi kuelewa kinaga kuhusiana na masuala zima ya mswada wa fedha wa mwaka 2023. Ndio lengo letu. Akishafahamu na viongozi wafahamu, yale machache yazungumziwe, maamuzi yatasalia kwa wabunge wetu.
Absolutely, and we want to thank most sincerely our guests in the town hall session for staying through the entire conversation on the big conversation. It's just taking a pause, it's not coming to an end, because this is an important conversation, a revolutionary conversation in our traditional town hall area, but we'll have this conversation going forward as well. Like we mentioned, it's just taking a pause. The big conversation continues at some point, but for now, we want to cross over to Jeff and Ludo.
All right, Trevor, Rashid, Sam, Nimrod, Ayub and Lincoln, guys, it's been a fantastic job, and thank you, all of you, for being a part of this very first big conversation. You know there's going to be many more, Lulu, right? Many more.
Na mitaendelea na tuendelee kuzungumza kupitia mtandao, hashtag yetu ikiwa ni the big conversation. Kwa niaba ya wote waliofanikisha matangazo haya moja kwa moja kutoka saa 1 hadi sasa ni saa 4 na dakika 40. Ni matumaini yetu kwamba mtazamaji umejifunza mawili matatu, zile cheche za kule nyumbani mmeziweka kando, na pia hapa tumeweza kudadavua, kila mmoja angeweza kufahamu, na kidogo umeenda na kitu nyumbani ukasema at least I've learned something
Absolutely.
today.
Thanks so much, and thank you to the entire team here. All our networks, Citizen TV, Inoro TV, Ramogi TV, Radio Citizen, Hot 96, everyone, the entire team that put this massive, massive project together. Thank you all, and thank you for watching. Good night. Good luck.
Kutoka kwetu ni asante na uwe na usiku mwanana. Kwa
God bless you all.